flee from a thing that surrounds me and leers through dead branches above.
This happened about 6 years ago and still creeps me out, but I am coming to accept what I saw. And after researching this subreddit, I am convinced what I saw was a crawler. Anyway, this was back in college, in central Pennsylvania. It was late, probably around midnight, on a weeknight, and my roommate and I had been smoking and trying to find something to do. We decided to go to a tunnel in the woods that was supposed to be haunted. People have basic ghost stories from visits there, but nothing too scary. My roommate and I get in his car and start driving there. We get to this tunnel in the middle of the woods. And when I say middle of the woods, I mean middle of the woods. It's very dark, and all you can really make out are the shadows from the moonlight. We get there and follow the directions to see a ghost. Drive through the tunnel, turn around, stop in the middle, turn the car off, etc. We are sitting there for a while, probably like 15-20 minutes just talking. We were getting ready to leave, and out of the right side of the tunnel, I start to see a shape coming out of the bushes, but can't really make out what it was. This thing then crawls into the middle of the tunnel, just sits there, hunched over, and turned its head to look at our car. Then it quickly shuffled on all fours to the other side of the tunnel. Looked exactly as other people have described here. Long skinny limbs, smaller torso, definitely not something I had seen before or have seen again. After seeing this thing, all I could say was go. Even before I got the words out, my roommate had turned his car on and started driving as fast as he could out of the woods without tearing up the bottom of his car. When we got out of the woods and to the road, my roommate says, "You know the Lord of the Rings, right?" This solidified that I saw what I saw, and my mind wasn't playing tricks on me. My experience is from late 2006, just before winter break of my freshman year of college. I went to a small college in rural western Pennsylvania, and the freshman parking lot was on the edge of campus up against some state game lands. We'd go out there a couple of nights a week to smoke some weed, and that night went to our usual spot in a clearing with a fallen log to sit on just past what you could see from the parking lot, though we could see the lights from the lot through the trees behind us. Now I'm sure you're already thinking, it was probably just the weed. But we were veteran smokers, had just started smoking that night, and had been smoking out of the same bag previous nights without any weird things happening. We packed a bowl and had maybe one hit each as we sat there talking quietly. It was winter, and this night was particularly cold, like in the teens Fahrenheit, but very still, no wind, almost nothing making sound out in the woods where we were. I took my first hit and handed the bowl and lighter back to my friend, then looked up to exhale. That's when I saw it, through the smoke. A humanoid face in the trees on the other side of the clearing, opposite the parking lot. It was just above a branch that it had its hand wrapped around. I think it had 3 fingers with a very long narrow thumb that stuck out several inches past its other fingers, each tipped with a pointed nail. As the smoke cleared, I got a better look at its face. Very pale, almost greyish skin, bald, no eyebrows, no other hair of any kind, no ears that I could see, big eyes relative to its head that were very dark in colour, catching just a little bit of light from the lights of the parking lot behind us, which made them seem kind of reflective. I didn't get a great look at the nose or mouth as I was fixated on the eyes, but from what I can recall, they seemed small relative to its head compared to a human. I tapped my friend's knee and quickly glanced over to him to see if he saw it as well, and he was staring at it too. So it's something we both saw independently. I looked back at it just as it released its hand from the branch, revealing very long, thin fingers to match the thumb, and then it moved backwards out of our sight without making a sound, even though there were dry leaves all over the ground. I'd guess only about 5 seconds actually passed during this span, but it felt much longer, and there was this odd calm over the whole situation. As soon as it was out of sight, however, my friend and I both felt intense fear, and we ran back to the parking lot. He was in such a panic that he didn't realize he had stuffed the still smoking bowl into his coat pocket and dropped the lighter. We ran to the opposite side of the lot from the woods where there was a road, some cars passing and some other students walking around, where we finally felt safe. There was an initial, "Oh my god, did you see that? What was that?" kind of conversation before we calmed down and talked about the details of what we saw, which matched up perfectly. The only thing he noticed that I didn't was that he said he didn't think it even had a mouth. We thought maybe it was a classic grey alien or something, but knew no one would believe us and didn't tell anyone else. The next day we went back to the spot in the woods and found our lighter, standing upright on the log we were sitting on. The odds of it falling and landing like that are very, very low, adding another creepy factor. Did this thing find it and put it there? We also walked over to the tree where we saw it and found the branch it was grasping. It was a good 10 to 12 feet above the ground. We couldn't even reach it by jumping, and there was nothing around. No stumps, no rocks, no lower branches, nothing that it could have been standing on. So it had to be tall to appear there. Weirdly, the leaves on the ground had been disturbed all around the area beneath the tree. Not like just tracks or something, but it was as if something had intentionally brushed the leaves away and then dug some shallow holes, maybe 4 to 6 of them, about 6 to 8 inches deep and 2 to 3 inches wide. My friend was a biology major who had been an Eagle Scout and now works in a state park, so he knew a good deal about most of the area's wildlife and didn't know of anything that would disturb the ground in that fashion. Plenty of animals dig, but they don't sweep away an area of leaves like that, probably about 5 foot by 5 foot, just to dig a couple of holes like that. He couldn't find any other tracks leading away from the area either. We never went back out there after dark again, and never saw it again either. Anyway, that's my possible encounter with a crawler. Make of it what you will. Right, so I've got a story. I've lived in Florida most of my life, until October 2020 when I moved to upstate South Carolina. I lived with my grandparents in the mountains around Salem for a little while before moving to an outer suburb of Greenville. The backyard of my house in Greenville had a downward slope and a creek at the bottom, then an upward slope on the other side leading to another set of houses. The creek led to a large patch of woods, one more house down past mine, a good 50-ish acres. Not long after moving in, I went and explored the creek and found a small shard of pottery half buried in the ground. It was dark greenish and had a few basic floral designs on it. I brought it inside because I was planning to contact the nearby university to ask if it had any significance, but I never actually got around to doing it. One day shortly after that, sitting on my back porch around noon, I started hearing whistles, like some guy was calling his dog or something. But it was the exact same tone and melody every single time. It never changed. I looked around and didn't see anyone, but I could pinpoint where the sound was coming from. It was coming from the patch of woods down the creek the first couple of times I heard it, then slowly moved out of the woods and into the backyard of the house behind me. Again, I didn't see anyone, and it was still the same whistle, almost like it was a recording on repeat. This happened every couple of days for a few weeks. Always the same exact whistle, and no one else to be seen but me. I didn't think anything of it at the time, until I moved again, late last year, to Spartanburg County. Obviously I won't say exactly where I am, but I'm in the northern part of a very rural area. Plenty of woods around, along with plenty of coyotes and other wildlife, I hadn't heard the whistle in a long while, probably about a year. A couple of weeks ago, I was sitting outside my house about 9 p.m, doing a bonfire. I heard a pack of coyotes go nuts around a quarter of a mile away, which isn't unusual, so I didn't think anything of it. After a couple of minutes, they went completely silent, and I didn't hear any other wildlife, not even crickets. Then, out of nowhere, I hear the exact same whistle again. It was coming from a ditch next to the road in front of my house, around 30 yards from where I was sitting. I froze and sat there listening, as I knew that this time something was up. Why am I hearing the exact same whistle as I've heard in the backyard of a previous house over an hour's drive away? I waited another few minutes and heard it one more time, then silence. Another few minutes pass, then the usual wildlife and cricket sounds start going again. The rest of the night I felt watched, and now every time I go out at night, I feel the same way. I don't know what it is for sure, considering all I've got are a few identical whistles, but it's definitely not normal. Whatever it might be, there's no doubt it followed me from Greenville over an hour away. I tried ruling it out by saying it's birds, but the timing is just way too irregular. Surely I'd hear it more often, right? Instead of a few times last summer and then not at all until the middle of September a year later? Looking for answers on what it might be and what to do about it, if anything. As far as the pottery shard, it was left in a closet at the previous house in Greenville, which has now been rented out to another tenant. Any other questions? Feel free to ask. So as stated in my previous post, I had an unusual experience with an entity that's been whistling at me and following me. I've been told this entity is most likely a crawler. I've also said I'd keep providing updates if anything happens. Well, something potentially happened. Not long ago, I walked down my driveway to check the mail. My driveway is about 200 feet long, down to the mailbox. I won't lie. Ever since I wrote that first thread a couple of days ago, I've been incredibly curious to know exactly what I'm dealing with. And I'm not afraid to admit, I've been actively scanning the treetops for anything I might see every time I walk outside. Well, after I got the mail and walked back up the driveway, I stood on my back porch, just watching. I ended up paying most of my attention to a large oak tree in a neighbor's yard, about 100 yards from where I was standing. Up near the top, I could see daylight peeking through and watched that particular spot for a moment. After about 30 seconds of watching the tree, I actually did see something. It moved from the top end of the tree and hopped down the branches at a fast pace. At first, I thought it was a squirrel or something like that, but it was just too big. I was too far away to make out any physical features, but I could see that it was grey in color and at least 5 to 6 feet tall as it was bounding down the branches. The rate it was hopping down branch by branch honestly just made it look like a grey gorilla trying to drop to the bottom of the tree as fast as it could. Again, I couldn't make out any physical features like arms or legs, but I honestly can't think of any animal that would be that large and that fast. Unless a hairless chimpanzee the size of a full-grown human escaped from a nearby zoo and just so happened to end up in a tree in my neighbor's backyard over 50 miles away, I guess. I'm gonna go out tomorrow night and set up some cameras and just sit and watch to see if anything happens. Not gonna try interacting with it. Just gonna sit back and observe for a while. I'll post another update if anything happens. Another possible sighting, this time by my own dad. I've currently got a really bad case of RSV and still haven't set up cameras and done that mini investigation like I said I wanted to. I'm hoping I'm healed up soon because stuff like this just keeps happening. Last night, just after dark, my dad took his dog out to the back door to do her business. As soon as they walked out, my dad started frantically calling for the dog to come back inside. When he finally got the dog back inside, he walked up to my mum and said, "Something's not right," in a shaky voice. I asked him what happened. He told me he saw something walking from left to right across our backyard behind the bushes. He couldn't see exactly what it was because he was only catching glimpses of it in the gaps of the bushes, but he described it as walking on all fours, light-colored and very tall. He held up his hand to show how tall its back was off the ground, and it was an easy 4.5 to 5 foot off the ground. My first thought was to grab my phone and rush out there. Probably not too smart, but I really wanted to see what it was. Plus, it had still only been around 30 seconds since my dad came in. I didn't see anything, and there were no tracks. The neighbors to the right of us were in their backyard having a cookout, so I walked over to ask them if they saw anything. They said they hadn't. I should also note that there is a 6-foot chain-link fence separating my backyard and theirs. So whatever this thing was somehow walked from left to right across my backyard, hopped a 6-foot fence into the neighbor's backyard, and disappeared without a trace. All without my neighbors seeing a damn thing. Animal-wise, the only thing I could think of is maybe something like a large grey wolf. But the only wolves we have around here are red wolves, which only get to about the size of a regular dog, and they're supposedly restricted to a few habitats in the far east of the state along the coast. Black bear is also a possibility, but my dad said whatever it was light-colored, and I've never seen them around here. Plus, surely my neighbors having a cookout would have seen it too, right? I don't know. With the way he described it, it leads me to believe it was probably the same thing I saw climbing that tree the other day. At least I know I'm not the only one experiencing things. November 10th, 2022. I left my house for some grocery shopping. It was around 6:30 p.m, already dark outside. Right down the road from my house was a major vehicle accident. 3 cars involved, all totaled and destroyed, with only one sheriff's deputy on scene. I stopped and offered to help as I work in EMS/SAR, and the singular deputy looked like he'd have his hands full. The deputy declined, stating the victims had already been taken by ambulance and he was only waiting for tow trucks, which was a relief. But you could tell by his face it was a bad incident. I said bye and good luck and drove off, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. It just felt like it was eating at me as soon as I pulled away from the scene. Well, as I'm sure you've heard in my recent posts, I've stated I live in a very rural area, with thousands of acres of forests. After about 5 minutes of driving, I came up to a bridge I had to take a left turn on, forests on both sides of the road, and right as I was making the turn, my headlights beamed across a humanoid face, and it ducked down behind the concrete guardrail almost immediately. But for a split second, we made eye contact, and I got a rather good look at its face. It was very pale, grey in colour, completely bald, somewhat wrinkly, no eyebrows or facial hair, no ears. Its eyes glowed bright white with a yellowish hue, similar to how a cat's eyes glow when light shines on them. I could make out what seemed like a sunken-in nose and mouth, but my main focus was on the eyes, so I didn't get a good enough look at the nose and mouth to describe them. Its head was slightly smaller than a normal human, and its neck a bit longer. Normal humans, when trying to hide behind something, will duck down in a downward motion, yeah? This thing didn't do that. Instead, it quickly turned to the right and threw its head forward to get below the crest of the concrete. At first, I thought it might have been some crackhead, but it just did not look normal at all. I turned around and pulled over to take a closer look with my phone light, but it was just too dark to see much of anything. The creature was gone by then. Fast forward a couple of days, and every time I drive by that bridge, I keep getting the urge to have a look at it during the daytime, to see how far it is from the guardrail to the ground from where it was peeking its scrawny head over. It's a very steep incline that goes down to a quickly flowing river, at least a 45 to 50 degree angle. I stepped back and visualized where I saw its head, then had a look over the edge and immediately got a bad feeling in my gut. From the top of that guardrail to the angled ground below is about 8 foot. Whatever this thing was, it was definitely not human, and was either almost 9 feet tall, or somehow hanging off the side of this concrete bridge with no arms visible. I still have no idea what I saw that night, but I'll say this: I'm a city boy from Florida, born and raised there. While I've always believed in the paranormal, after I moved out here to the Appalachians with my family in 2020, there is just so much weird shit that goes on in these hills. I've had a few ghostly experiences from time to time throughout my life, but the shit I encounter out here is just a whole different ballgame. Thousands of acres of vast forests untouched by modern humans that could very well be hiding some freaky creatures we've never thought to exist. P.S. You may be asking why the vehicle accident is relevant to the sighting. Well, from what I've come to understand, supposedly these things feed off negative feelings and energy. My theory is that the dread I felt after leaving the scene of the accident prompted the creature to show itself. Or I'm just completely off my rocker and hallucinated the damn thing. That's a possibility too. I'm beating myself up that I didn't have a dash cam running at the time. Back when I was in high school, my friend and I saw something I've been referring to as a crawler. This was in Rossville, Illinois, nighttime and in a cemetery. I think it was probably late summer or early fall, because I don't remember it being too cold out. Would have been between 2007 and 2010. Pretty sure the moon was full, or close to it, because visibility was very good. My friend and I used to walk this loop. We would leave her place and go down a block to a side road that led to a park. We would then turn left and cut across the park to the side entrance of the cemetery. The cemetery and park sat at the very southwest corner of town. Beyond that was just woods and cornfields. If we went straight across the cemetery, it would take us to another side road that then led to the main street, back to where her house was. We made it to the cemetery and were walking the main drive that split the property in half. There was a sudden noise that made both of us stop. My friend started laughing nervously and asked if I had heard the noise. I told her I had seen what made the noise. To our left, I had seen something running behind the headstones. It was on all fours, but humanoid. It had extremely pale skin and no hair, and looked very thin. I remember it was so pale it almost reflected the moonlight. It moved so fast, too fast for any human I've ever seen on their hands and feet, that I couldn't see many details. It was in total profile, so I never saw the facial details. The way it ran was animal-like, as well in that it had that gait where its feet came forward almost between or past its hands. Watch a video of a big cat or wild dog running and see what I mean. We were both terrified. We just stood there, panicking and listening to it moving around, just out of sight, while we called one of her friends to come meet us and take us the rest of the way home. Her friend, a very typical high school boy, arrived and naturally wanted to stay in the cemetery and goof off for a while. For some reason, with him there acting dumb, it was less scary. But I remember, it just kept making these wide circles around us. It always stayed out of sight, but you could hear it as it moved. Occasionally, it would come a bit closer, then seemed to dart further away again. Eventually we left. I spent a while researching it and even reached out to a paranormal group in Champaign for advice. The guy I talked to had never heard of it, but wanted to document what we saw. We met up with him and did an interview, but the group never did an investigation. Fast forward a few years and I'm living in Aurora, Colorado. I met one of my closest friends in about 2012. We really hit it off because we were into the paranormal. When I eventually told him about what I had seen, his jaw hit the floor. He told me he had seen the same thing and told me his story. He described exactly what I had seen, but he had seen it under a porch while living in Thornton. It was crouched down and squatting. He thinks he startled it while it was eating because he said it was hunched over something it was holding. He comes from a Navajo/Apache background, and when we first met, his best guess was Skinwalker or Wendigo. But then, and especially now, he said he had his doubts about either of those things being the answer. He was dating a girl at the time whose mum claimed to be a medium. She said she thought it was something that someone woke up, and that now it was angry. We both have serious doubts on that one. The stranger part came when he and I brought it up. We both started having very intense nightmares about it. His were worse than mine, and lasted much longer. This was also punctuated by a 6-month period of time filled with a lot of bad luck and anxiety for us. I always sort of brushed this off, as us just psyching ourselves out, until I sent my story into a podcast. After it was read, another listener sent in their story. They described what my friend and I had seen, and also described the sightings as being punctuated by nightmares. I couldn't write that off because he spoke about his nightmares in detail, and they matched my friend's nightmares exactly. I've never given out any details of what actually happened in either of our nightmares. I've read a ton of other stories by other users and people on the internet. I've dug through mounds of lore and cryptid lists. I still don't feel like I have an answer to what the thing was. My best guess at this point is that the nightmares aren't coincidental, and that this is something that is interdimensional. It seems like it can interact with physical things around it, but I've never heard anyone tell a first-hand account of being physically attacked or even touched. I speculated on what it could be for hours, and the only conclusion that I've come to is that I don't feel like there is an actual concrete answer. I think it might be something that's been around and inspired other cryptids and paranormal tales. But I don't think it's a Wendigo, Skinwalker, Ghoul, Fleshgate, etc. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.